Now we come to the chapter of the twos. We have finished with the chapter of the ones. Anguttara Nikaya, chapter of the twos. Dukkha Nipata. 2.1.2. The Buddha said, monks, these two struggles are hard to undergo in the world. What two? The struggle of householders who live at home to provide clothing, food, lodging, medicines for the sick, and provision of necessities, and the struggle of those who have gone forth from home to the homeless to renounce all bases of rebirth. These are the two struggles. Of these two, monks, the latter is the more important. Wherefore I say unto you, thus must you train yourselves. We will undertake the struggle to renounce all substrates of rebirth, or all bases of rebirth. That is how you must train yourself, monks. So the Buddha says, that's the end of the sutta. The Buddha is saying that the struggle of householders is to provide the necessities for the home. And the struggle of monks is to renounce the supports or the basis of rebirth. And the struggle of monks is the more important. Sometimes we find a lot of people, they go through life struggling one thing after another. When they're young, a lot of people, they struggle to get a good education, and after that they want to get a good job. After that they want a good marriage partner, and after that they want children. One thing after another they want, then a car and a house and grandchildren later, etc. And then at the end of it all, a lot of people, when they are about to die, they are very confused, they are very disappointed, and then they wonder what life is all about. All the things that they wanted, they struggle for, most of it they have attained, and suddenly they find that they have to lose all of it. So we keep on coming back again and again to do this kind of struggle. But the Buddha said the struggle to end the cycle of rebirth is far more important. And then the next sutta is 2.1.3. Monks, there are these two things that burn. What two? Herein a certain one has done immoral acts of body. He has done immoral acts in speech and thought. He has omitted moral acts in body, speech and thought. He is burned or seared with remorse at the thought, I have done wrong in body, speech and thought. I have left undone the good deeds in body, speech and thought. And he burns at the thought of it. These monks are the two things that burn. So the Buddha says, if we have done immoral acts, immoral karma in body, speech and mind, or we have omitted to do moral acts, moral karma, wholesome karma in body, speech and thought, then our conscience is pricked. So you see, sometimes it's not only that we do something immoral, even if we fail to do something that we ought to do, later it will burn our conscience and we get pricked by it. That's why we have to be careful. What are the immoral acts? For example, immoral act of body might be killing, committing adultery or stealing. And immoral acts of speech might be lying, slandering, carrying tales so that people quarrel, etc. And then immoral act of thought might be having hatred for somebody, etc. Now the next sutta is 2.1.5. The Buddha said, two things, monks, have I realized. To be discontented in good states and not to shrink back from the struggle. Without shrinking back, monks, I struggle on thus. Gladly would I have skin and sinews and bones wither, and my body's flesh and blood dry up, if only I may hold out until I win what may be won by human strength, by human energy, by human striving. By my earnest endeavor, monks, I won enlightenment. I won the unrivaled freedom from the bond. And you too, monks, Do not you decline the fight, but struggle on, saying to yourselves, Gladly would I have my skin and sinews and bones wither, and my body's flesh and blood dry up, if only I may hold out until I win what may be won by human strength, by human energy, by human striving. Then you too, monks, in no long time shall win that goal for which the clansmen rightly leave home for the homeless life, even that unrivaled goal of righteous living, realizing it for yourselves even in this very life, and having reached it, you shall abide therein. Wherefore I say unto you, monks, thus must you train yourselves. We will not decline the fight, but will struggle on with this thought. Let skin and sinews and bones wither, etc., etc. That is how you must train yourselves, monks. That's the end of the sutta. There's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think number 12, where the Buddha described the struggle that he underwent, the 6 years, the various types of suffering he underwent, and it was quite moving to read the way the Buddha struggled. And the Buddha said that nobody in the past could have suffered more than him on the spiritual path. And in the future, the Buddha said nobody also could possibly suffer more than him on the spiritual path. At the very most, they could only equal the amount of suffering he went through. So you see that our teacher is somebody who exerted himself. And the Buddha, that's why, also encourages us to put in a lot of effort. And how much effort we put in would determine how much we get out of the spiritual path. And basically, it is concerned with letting go. Letting go. The spiritual path is concerned with letting go of the ego, letting go with our likes and dislikes, our opinions, and etc. And anything to do with the ego. That's why it's very important to always observe our mind. If a person is a meditator, he should always be observing his mind, see the ego working. The next sutta is 2.1.6. Buddha said, Monks, there are these two things. What two? Looking with satisfaction on things which are fetters that bind to rebirth, and looking with disgust thereon. Monks, he who dwells looking with satisfaction on things that bind like fetters abandons not greed, abandons not hatred, abandons not delusion. He who abandons not these is not released from rebirth, from old age, from sickness, from death, sorrow and grief, woe, lamentation and despair. He is not released from dukkha, ill, I say. But monks, he who dwells looking with disgust on things which are fetters that bind, abandons greed, hatred and delusion. Abandoning these, he is released from old age and decay, etc. He is released from dukkha, I declare. These monks are the two things. That's the end of the sutta. So the Buddha is saying that there are certain things which are fetters, attachments to our relatives, attachments to our property, our wealth. These are the two greatest attachments. The Dhammapada, the Buddha said, the chains, iron chains that bind a person are nothing compared to the bonds that are created from family ties, from worldly ties, ties of close family, ties of our property, etc. Those are real bonds. So, a person who is not learned in the Dhamma, those things that are fetters to that person, that means those things are things that bind him to the wheel of samsara. He looks with satisfaction on them. He's very happy and satisfied that he's got a big house, got a lot of money in the bank, he's got very beautiful children, very loving husband or very loving wife, etc. Those things that to a worldly person are things that give him joy and happiness, are those very things that bind us to samsara. That is why it is very difficult to walk the path, the spiritual path. Most people, they want to enjoy those things now because it's very normal for worldly people, for normal human beings to enjoy things like that, having a loving husband, loving wife, loving children, etc. And they get a lot of joy and satisfaction, enjoying good music, a nice TV set, Astro TV and all that. Those are the very things that bring us back to rebirth. So the Buddha says, if we have the wisdom of the Dhamma, from listening to the Dhamma, then we know that these are the things that bring us back to rebirth. That's why the Buddha says in the Dhammapada that the worldly path is in one direction. The path to Nibbana is in the opposite direction. Some people they think they want to get the best of both worlds. They want to put one foot in one boat and one foot in the other boat. It's very difficult to do that. If you make any progress after some time, you realize that if you really want to cultivate, you have to renounce. If you don't renounce, it's very difficult to practice. 2.1.9, the Buddha said, monks, these two bright states protect the world. What two? Sense of shame and fear of blame. Hiri Ottappa, which probably can be better translated as conscience and remorse. And then Buddha continues, monks, if these two states did not protect the world, then there would be seen no mother or mother's sister, no uncle's wife, nor teacher's wife, nor wife of honorable men. But the world would come to confusion. Promiscuity such as exists among goats and sheep, fowls and swine, dogs and jackals. But monks, since these two bright states do protect the world, therefore there are seen mothers and mothers' sisters, uncles and uncle's wife, teacher's wife, etc., etc. That's the end of the sutta. So the Buddha is saying that because we have a sense of conscience and remorse, conscience meaning like the fear to do something wrong, and remorse meaning that to grieve, to feel remorse over some wrong that you have done. People without a sense of remorse, they do something wrong and they don't feel the conscience pricking them. Maybe their conscience does prick them, but they just keep on doing the wrong things until, how can I say, it doesn't pain them anymore. So a person with remorse and conscience, he would not do things that animals do. The Buddha is saying, talking here about promiscuity. You see animals, they don't recognize a mother and son or daughter, etc. They just are very promiscuous. So human beings don't do that, but sometimes you find some human beings do that. Especially nowadays, you read in the papers, there's a lot of cases of incest, etc. So if we behave like animals, then it's very likely that next time we come back to rebirth, we'll have an animal rebirth. If we behave like devas, then it's very likely that we will have rebirth in the deva realm. 2.2.5, the Buddha said, monks, if in any dispute the offending monk and the reproving monk do not practice strict self-examination, it may be expected that it will conduce to protracted, bitter, contentious strife, and the monks will be unable to live at ease. But when in any dispute both the offending monk and the reproving monk do practice strict self-examination, it may be expected that it will not conduce to protracted, bitter, contentious strife, and that the monks will be able to live at ease. And how do the two parties practice strict self-examination? Herein the offending monk reflects thus: I have fallen into some bodily offense. Now, the other monk saw some particular occasion of bodily offense into which I had fallen. Had I not so offended, he could not have seen it. Since I so offended, he saw it. Seeing it, he was annoyed. Being annoyed thereat, he gave utterance to his annoyance. Thus rebuked by him, in his annoyance I also was annoyed, and told others of my annoyance. So herein my fault overcame me, as in the case of one who has to pay duty on his goods. That is how the offending monk practices strict self-examination. And how monks does the reproving monk do likewise? Herein the reproving monk thus reflects: this monk has fallen into some bodily offense. Indeed, I saw this monk so falling into offense. Had he not done so, I should not have seen him so doing. As he did so, I saw him so doing. At the sight of this, I was displeased thereat. Being displeased, I expressed my displeasure to this monk. Thus annoyed by my expression of annoyance, this monk told others of his annoyance. So herein my fault overcame me, as in the case of one who has to pay duty on his goods. That is how the reproving monk practices strict self-examination. Now if both the offending and reproving monk do not practice strict self-examination, it may be expected that it will conduce to protracted, bitter, contentious strife, and the monks will be unable to live at ease. But if, on the contrary, they do practice strict self-examination, it may be expected that the opposite will happen. That's the end of the sutta. This sutta is more for monks, but it is equally applicable to lay people. Sometimes you find two parties quarreling, and the Buddha is saying that if we are involved in any quarrel or in any ill feeling with somebody else, we have to examine ourselves and be frank and see our faults. And if we practice self-examination and admit our faults, then we can apologize, or at least even if we don't apologize, we don't make matters worse by prolonging the dispute or whatever. 2.2.7 The Brahmin Janusoni came to visit the Exalted One, and after paying respect, etc., sat down at one side. So seated, he said to the Exalted One, "Pray, Master Gautama, what is the reason, what is the cause, why some beings here in this world, when body breaks up after death, are reborn in the waste, the woeful plains, the downfall, in hell?" The Buddha said, "Owing to commission and omission, Brahmin." And then Janusoni asked again, "But pray, Master Gautama, why are they reborn when body breaks up after death in the happy lot in the heaven world?" Again the Buddha said, "Owing to commission and omission, Brahmin." And Janusoni said, "I do not understand the detailed meaning of what has been concisely stated by the worthy Gautama, but not explained in detail. It would be well for me if the worthy Gautama would teach me Dhamma in such a way that I might understand his meaning in detail." Then the Buddha said, "Then Brahmin, do you listen? Give careful attention and I will speak." "Very good, sir," replied the Brahmin Janusoni to the Exalted One. The Exalted One said, "Now in this connection, Brahmin, certain beings have committed immoral acts of body, speech and thought. They have omitted moral acts of body, speech and thought. Thus, Brahmin, it is owing to commission and omission that beings are reborn in the waste, the woeful plains, the downfall, in hell. Again, Brahmin, certain beings have committed moral acts of body, speech and thought. They have omitted immoral acts of body, speech and thought. Thus again, it is owing to commission and omission that beings after death are reborn in the heaven world." Excellent Master Gautama, excellent Master Gautama, etc., etc. And then I think the Brahmin took refuge in the Buddha. So here this sutta again is about karma. the Buddha again is saying that karma has two parts of it, that the doing of something and neglecting to do something. So just like I explained just now, both we have to look after. Just like, for example, if we create good karma towards our parents, that is good karma. But because our parents have done a lot for us, so if we neglect to look after our parents, and that again is very bad karma. Now we'll come to another sutta, which is a previous sutta which I missed out the last time. That is 2.3.9. The Buddha said, "Monks, it is because I observe these two results therein that I am given to dwelling in lonely spots, in solitary lodging in the forest. What two? Observing my own pleasant way of living in this very life, and feeling compassion for future generations. These are the two results." That's the end of the sutta. Here the Buddha is saying that he likes to live in secluded places, live alone in the forests or caves, etc. for two reasons. One is his own pleasant way of living. That means he has a pleasant abiding for himself, because when a monk stays alone, there is nobody to disturb him, and he's very free to do what he likes. And especially if a monk is good in meditation, he can just spend his time in meditation, which gives him a lot of bliss and a lot of advantage in the spiritual life, because the Buddha said that the cultivation of the jhanas will give you 4 advantages. Cultivation of the mind, cultivation of samadhi, concentration, give you 4 advantages, namely the 4 fruits of Aryahood, Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami, and Arahanthood. This is mentioned, I think, in the Digha Nikaya. And he also said somewhere, I think in the Sutta or in the Vinaya, he says, when he lives alone in the forest, then he feels so free that even when he wants to answer the calls of nature, he doesn't have to look around to see whether anybody is around. And the second reason is feeling compassion for future generations. This is because of compassion for future generations. He is showing the way for monks. In other words, encouraging monks to stay in secluded places, to cultivate themselves. And he also always encouraged monks to practice alone, stay in secluded places and practice alone. But of course, not all monks can do it unless you come to that stage where you can live alone. If you go and try to live alone when you're not ready, it can have a negative effect instead of a positive. The other thing I'd like to mention here concerning this sutta is, in the Mahayana teachings, there is a little bit of contradiction also concerning this one, because in the Mahayana Bodhisattva precepts, one of the minor Bodhisattva precepts is that a Bodhisattva is not allowed or forbidden to stay alone in the quiet place, aranya, a secluded place. He's not allowed, according to the Bodhisattva precept, to stay alone. Whereas here, even the Buddha is already enlightened, and yet he likes to stay alone. And he also encourages his disciples who are not enlightened yet to also dwell alone, to cultivate themselves. The other person who's famous for staying alone is Mahakassapa, the very ascetic monk, disciple of the Buddha.